Now back to the Grady and Big Joe Show. Get your 2 cents in at 239-1070. Now here's Michael Grady and Big Joe Staceniak.
Don't sweat the technique.
Grady and Big Joe Show, 107.5, 1070 The Fan. I put out on Twitter, a lot of smoke last week after that scoreless performance against the Jaguars. But how you feeling now? Go ahead and tweet those responses. I'll read as many of them as I can on air, but just want your reaction, how you're feeling a week later after the scoreless performance against Jacksonville, beating Houston in Houston, a team that was on a 9-game winning streak, a lot of confidence, and even after a slow start, Colts put the hammer down and then hold on and win the game on an offsides penalty. Come on, man. Or encroachment. Come on now. That's an embarrassing way to go down, Jadeveon.
That's why he wouldn't give interviews.
What's that?
That's why he wouldn't talk to anybody afterward.
Man, let's go to Stephen Holder right now. He's at the airport, getting ready to make his way back to Indianapolis. And Stephen, one of the big things we were talking about in the first segment of the show is that the Colts defense has been kind of under the radar. We've talked so much about the offense and the streak that Andrew Luck was on with the 3 touchdowns a game, for at least 3 touchdowns for 8 straight weeks. Still talking about the offense when they were shut out by Jacksonville. How could this happen? But under the radar has been a vast improvement from this Colts defense. And one way to illustrate that was on the play that set the Texans up to beat the Colts in their first meeting after the 4th and 4 letdown. Watson to Hopkins on a 24-yard gain. 24-yard gain sets them up for the game-winning field goal. And then Hopkins only has 36 yards yesterday. What are you seeing from this defense? Where's been the biggest improvement there?
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned the Hopkins play from the first game, because I remember writing about that like a day or two later, and I was like, hey, we could talk about Frank Reich's call on 4th down. But I'm like, hey, man, this is the play that also, this is a play that also lost the game. I mean, it was just easy. It was a routine play. So you did not see that yesterday until the late completion to their tight end on that last scoring drive the Texans had. They had 2 plays at that point longer than 20 yards. They had a 28-yard and a 20-yarder. And this is an explosive offense we're talking about here. And at that point, they had really not had any explosive plays but for 2. And so compare that to the first game, as you said, where I felt like there were just a number of those throughout the day. And they are steadily making progress. I will tell you this. We are not having a playoff-centric conversation right now if it's not for Matt Eberflus and what he has done on that defense. And the whole Josh McDaniels saga was a nightmare, obviously, and an embarrassment and a black eye. But it's kind of funny. If not for that situation, Matt Eberflus is not here. And I'm telling you, I really think he is a big reason for this. He's got a lot of the same guys that Chuck Pagano had last year. Okay, not all of them, but he has a lot of the same guys Chuck Pagano had. They didn't overhaul the entire defense. They got some guys, they got some pieces. Autry is a huge one, obviously. But most of those guys were here last year. That's all I'm saying.
You just mentioned something that took me back to that play because I see it in my sleep right now. The part of the problem with that defensive play in week 4 was it was Darius Leonard lined up on Hopkins, if I'm not mistaken. They did the same thing, but it was in the red zone yesterday, and he had a hell of a play. But you can't cover Hopkins with a linebacker, like you said, and with all that open ground and everything.
Baldy just tweeted that, by the way. He just tweeted that.
Yeah.
That exact play.
Did he?
Yeah.
And so I tell you what I think is happening here is a couple of things. Number one, they're doing more schematically on defense now than they were early in the season. And the reason for that is because these guys are growing. I mean, that was Darius Leonard's 4th game ever at that time. And so now you see Kenny Moore coming off the edge and getting the sack, and you see a variety of pressures coming. Not a lot. They're not going to pressure more than 4 or 5 times a game. That's it. But he pushes the buttons. He pushes those buttons at the right time, and these guys are executing because you can blitz all day long. If you don't get home, what's the point? All you're going to do is get beat on the back end because your guys are out there in single coverage. But these guys, they pick their spots, and when they pressure, they get there. And then, in addition to that, to Joe's point about Darius Leonard being in single coverage against DeAndre Hopkins, who's like a top 5 receiver. You're not seeing that kind of thing anymore. Because again, like I said, they're broadening. They have a broader base of things to work with now because I think they're just comfortable doing more from a scheme standpoint with this defense, and that's growth, man. It is growth. That's all it is. They are so young, okay, and I think you're just seeing a coordinator who wasn't ready to trust those guys yet, and I get it. But now I think he's reached that point.
Interesting. Stephen Holder, The Athletic, joining us on the Payless Liquors hotline here on 107.5 and 1070 The Fan. Stephen, on the offensive side of the ball, shutout a week ago against Jacksonville. Could have put some points on the board, but some gambles on fourth down didn't go their way. And then they start the game against Houston with 3 straight 3-and-outs. I asked Joe in the first segment, he mentioned that the bomb to T.Y. Hilton is really what turned the tide in terms of confidence. Do you look at that play the same way? Like that big play down the field to T.Y. Hilton, where it was kind of this collective sigh of relief, like, okay, now we can get rolling.
Yes, I do, because look, this was 5 quarters in the making. Okay, now, so right. We're talking about 4 quarters last week, and then another quarter in the first quarter on Sunday. So that's 5 quarters of pressure just mounting and on your shoulders. What's wrong? Who are we? What happened to us? Right? I mean, the same questions we were asking. Don't you think they were wondering too? I mean, Derek Ebron was like, I haven't scored a touchdown in like 3 quarters. What's going on? You know what I mean? Like, I'm surprised to just like, pack up and go to the locker room. But in all seriousness, I mean, listen, I think Frank Reich was pretty honest about that yesterday, and he said, when you don't score and you're an offensive coach, man, that's all on you. And look, he can talk all he wants. Last week he was saying all the right things about, stick to the process. Sounded like Chuck Pagano up there, right? But I think in his heart of hearts, he knew that was a bad look, and it was on him, okay? He had to figure this out. You're going through the division for the second time. Have they figured you out? All these questions, right, were being raised. And I think he came up yesterday with some answers. And the the decision to go no huddle was perfectly timed. You had a little bit of momentum because of the TY play, as you said, and he knew they couldn't let it get away. They had to seize that momentum and get on top of that. Anthony Costanzo told me after the game, he said, we go no huddle. He said that felt like a 2-minute drill. It was like we were down, like trying to catch up and try to win the game. I mean, they just went crazy. So they did what they had to do, and it worked.
A big difference, speaking of T.Y., with Hopkins, who was a Colt killer in the first meeting, only having 36 yards yesterday, credit the defense, and then T.Y. Hilton with a $199, Stephen.
Yeah, I mean, I told T.Y. after the game, I said, how much money do you think you've made off the Houston Texans? He just looked at me, he's like, man, that's code for a hell of a lot.
Yeah.
I'm just saying, how many of those $13 million per year do you think came as a result of the Texans? I mean, I'm just saying, I think a lot of it.
He was right up there in Frank's face along with Andrew at the 2-minute warning, saying, hey, let's not, we still need a first down here. Don't go away from the passing game. I'm here.
Right.
Yeah, I love that.
I love that.
Yeah.
I love that, by the way. I will tell you now, listen, I don't mean to keep rehashing the past and comparing staffs and that kind of thing. And I don't really always feel comfortable doing that. But I think this is an instance where we can make the case. There's no question. Now, I don't know what Rob Chudzinski personally felt about those situations, but there is no question how Chuck Pagano felt about those kinds of situations. There's no question he would have tried to run as much clock as he could and just try to hold on for dear life. And Frank Reich said, to hell with that. Forget it. We're going for this. And I loved that. Now, I thought last week there were some instances where he was probably unnecessarily aggressive, and we could debate that. But I think when you're aggressive at the right time, I loved it. I think that was the way you go win the game.
The two things, Stephen, and I want to break this down because I was shocked when I saw actually the stats on paper, but we all talked about Andrew Luck. And part of the reason in week 4 going on fourth down was how hot Andrew was. In the second half of that game, he was completing 74% of his passes. He was 28 of 38 for 322 and 3 touchdowns. That's why Frank Reich went for it. You know what Andrew did in the second half yesterday? He completed 77% of his passes. He was 10 of 13, 162 and a touchdown. And so a quarterback rating of 143.8. The guy is killing the Texans in the second half. You talk about, Hopkins being a Colt killer. Andrew is killing the Texans in the second half. And we always talk about, you earn your money when the chips are down. That's when you earn your money. And he is doing that this year.
Yeah. Let me tell you, the thing that I was most impressed about yesterday about Andrew was his pocket presence. And I mean, we've always seen that from him. We know that he's elusive and all those things. It's not the elusiveness, though, that I think was most striking. What I felt was just his ability to feel the rush. There was a time, I believe it was J.J. Watt, I think, don't quote me, but there was a moment where he had some blind side pressure coming in, and Costanzo got beat. And I think it was J.J. Watt bearing down on him, and it was completely to his blind side. His head was locked down the field. His eyes were locked down the field. He wasn't watching the rush at all, and yet he ducked under that swipe that JJ made, and he missed him. And I have no idea how he knew he was there. I have no idea. And we asked him after the game. He said, "No, you just feel it, and you just kind of sense it." But how? I mean, he has either he has eyes in the back of his head, okay, or he's just got a sixth sense that not many quarterbacks have, and I think it's the latter. I think he's a guy who just kind of has a knack for that, and that's how you have to have that to deal with that kind of pass rush, okay? Because they're gonna beat those guys from time to time. I mean, J.J. Watt is the player that he is for a reason, and Clowney is nothing to sneeze at either, okay? So. Look, the protection yesterday I thought was fine when you consider the opponent and consider the personnel. So you have to prepare for some instances where you're going to get beat. The question is, how prepared is your quarterback to cope with that? And he was off the charts. His pocket presence he put on a clinic yesterday.
Now, before we wrap up, your thoughts, there's going to be a lot of hype for this Colts and Cowboys game coming up on Sunday. I'm looking at some of the other matchups. Pittsburgh at New England, I lost a little luster with the way Pittsburgh performed this past week, but Colts and Cowboys going to be talked up quite a bit.
Yeah, I think this is a similar matchup to the Texans. I'll tell you why. I mean, they've got obviously an explosive guy on the outside now, and Amari. They've got a running game, obviously with Zeke, and a quarterback who can make some plays. I think that it's a similar matchup. And then on defense, they've got some edge rush as well. So you're going to have to deal with the same challenges that they dealt with on Sunday in Houston. So, and I think that bodes well because those are things that they were able to cope with yesterday, right? And I think we'll see. Their rushing defense, by the way, has been top notch. The Texans came in third overall in terms of rushing offense, and that was not evident yesterday. You did not see a team that looked like the number 3 rushing team in the NFL. So I feel pretty confident about the Colts being able to handle Zeke. That's a hell of an offensive line, and they'll have a lot to deal with there. But I feel like they can handle that rushing game. And look, they're going to be playing a very familiar defensive scheme because that's the one the Colts play. So I think they're prepared to coach and make plays against, or game plan, I should say, against that scheme. And I think Matt Eberflus is going to be a nice help for them in that effort.
A win would make them at least 500 on the season. If no worse than 500 on the season if they were to beat the Cowboys. It would put them 2 games above 500 with a couple of games to go as they continue their pursuit for a playoff spot. But man, it's just hard to believe where this team has come from, where they are right now, still competing for a playoff spot, even after that goose egg we saw last week. Stephen Holder, The Athletic. We always appreciate it, brother. Thanks so much.
All right, fellas.
You got it, and safe travels. That's Stephen Holder from The Athletic on the Payless Liquors hotline. We'll update that playoff picture, read some of your tweets on how you feel about the Colts today versus how you felt a week ago. It's all coming up next here on The Fan.